It's dark and it looks like rain, you said. And the wind is blowing like it's the end of the world, you said. And it's so cold. It's like the cold if you were dead. And then you smiled for a second. Because you realized there's a new episode of Columbia House Party. How are you, man?
I'm good. I'm excited for this one. I'm really excited.
I love The Cure.
I don't think I knew that you were such a big... I mean, I'm sure we'll get into this. I had no idea you were such a big Cure fan.
I mean, come on.
I know, but like... I just didn't... I never... From all the bands I've heard you talk a lot about, I don't think I've heard you talk about The Cure before.
Yeah. I mean, how often do they come up, right?
That's true.
Jake, I'll tell you, man. Preparing for this episode...
A lot.
Yeah, on a extremely rainy day, no less. It was very much in my bag.
Very much. I would say this is, as you know, if you listen to this show, Blake and I sort of trade off lead duties for albums. This is by far my most note-heavy episode
so
far. Oh, yeah. I got like 6-7 pages here, man.
Damn.
This is a lot. There's a lot to say because it's been like close to 40 years of this band. So
it's been, I think, over 40 now.
76? What the heck? Again, math, not our strong suit.
Not only was it a super rainy day preparing for this episode, I started watching Mr. Robot.
Oh, okay. I watched the first season. I haven't seen the rest.
Okay. Well, my note on this is from the first season. So Elliot, the lead character, when he removes someone's info from his computer and he wipes down his computer and throws all the tech in the microwave to make sure it's unrecoverable and everything, he burns his stuff on each individual person to a CD first. So he has these plain white CDs, and then he writes a band name and an album name on it to obviously obscure what it is, but then he has an association with that. And in one of the first episodes, when he erases a character off of his computer, they get The Cure Disintegration as the thing. So not only did I come across that episode in the week we were preparing for this, the rainy day, everything. People told us in January that, Clay told us in January that we hadn't had like quite a rainy day episode yet.
Yeah, this is
the one.
This is definitely the one.
Jake, set us up, man. What are we doing today?
I think that both with Pixies, closing it out with The Cure, from a personal standpoint for me, also two bands that sort of go hand in hand in my brain, because I think this is probably true for a lot of people who are into rock music, that Pixies and The Cure are sort of two massive influence tentpole bands. I got into both of them like within the same couple months.
Okay, interesting.
I was from the same reason, because I had a friend who was teaching me about good music, basically.
Pixies and The Cure, the 80s version of My Chemical Romance and Fall Out Boy.
Yeah, not super far off, actually. I had a friend who, I think I was about 14 or 15, gave me both Surfer Rosa and one of The Cure's many, many, many greatest hits compilations one. They gave me Staring at the Sea.
You get a lot of hits over 44 years.
Yes, indeed. And I remember hearing Staring at the Sea for the first time and being like, oh. Like I knew of The Cure, obviously, because some of their songs are so famous that you can't not know The Cure. But it started me getting really deep into them right at the age when I was definitely I'm a morose teen. Let's listen to The Cure. It all works out. Obviously, through Staring at the Sea, I started digging into full-length albums. And this one immediately, and I don't think that's unique in this at all, because it's one of the most famous albums of all time, became my favorite. I think it is by far The Cure's best album, despite I think they have so many good ones. That speaks to the quality of this one. It's obviously a monumental album in rock music, goth music, new wave, whatever you want to call it. And so this is The Cure's Disintegration.
We came to The Cure very differently.
Interesting.
Shouldn't say I wasn't a fan. I just like didn't check them out when I was a teen.
Right.
And like around my mid-20s, I don't know if it was something about like the aesthetic where I just didn't want to lean in all, like I was cool dyeing my hair, but I wasn't cool with like going all the Robert Smith distance. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe I didn't want to lean too far into the sad side that early. I'm not really sure, but in retrospect, it always should have been extremely my shit. Like I went as Jack Skellington and Edward Scissorhands for consecutive Halloweens, and when the makeup wore off on my Edward Scissorhands costume by the end of the night, I basically just looked like Robert Smith. I will say, if you are going to play hockey the morning after Halloween, make sure you remove your eyeliner really well, because if you sweat into it, you're going to be in excruciating pain. So I didn't find The Cure until like my mid-20s.
Okay.
I have since, I'm pretty old, so that's given me ample time to go back and appreciate them. And I was glad we settled on Disintegration as the album to do pretty quickly.
There are, I think, a couple Cure records that could stand as like the big one, so to speak. But I think just from the critical reception, fan reception, the sort of enduring legacy of it, and also, I will talk about this a little more when we talk about sort of reception, but I'm always shocked that this album isn't as old as I think it is. Like, it came out in 1989. In my mind, this came out like early in their career, because usually when you're talking about a band of their stature, the big best magnum opus album is, second or third, your London Callings, your Born to Runs, whatever. And this is like their like sixth or seventh album.
Yeah, we could talk about that right now instead of saving it for later, because one of the things that struck me about that and looking at their chorus, we talked during the Plus 44 episode, and even Take Off Your Pants and Jacket a little bit, about how Blink was heading down this certain path, and when you get to Untitled and then you see how Boxcar fit in between Take Off Your Pants and Untitled, and then you see where Plus 44 went, and Mark is obviously listening to a lot of The Cure, and like The Cure like had near breakups so many times that we'll get into. That,
seemingly every album.
I don't know that Blink-182 would have made something as like critically strong as Disintegration, but had they not been like sidetracked by all these issues, you see where they went with Untitled and how they had gotten there. And then maybe that's a similar path where like, had they just stuck it out, the next thing after Untitled could have been their Disintegration. And like Untitled already got them, maybe not at the time, but in retrospect, a lot of like, holy shit, they became like a really good band and they figured it out. One more step in that direction, maybe they have this, our fifth album is our biggest and best album, and they just never got there. Whereas The Cure, by way of cycling in and out the same band members for eternity around Robert Smith, just like managed to get there. I think it's an interesting, like obviously in Blink Month, we've tied a lot of things back to Blink. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about what didn't happen with Blink is like, could you, maybe you don't last 44 years and release 400 albums, but could you have had your own Disintegration if you, not literal disintegration, because that's what happened, your metaphorical disintegration, had you just been able to stick it out a little longer? Yeah,
and like I'm on record on the Plus 44 episode of saying that I believe they would have, and like they
were so close. Like
I was listening to
Untitled is still it still holds up really well.
I know I'm preaching to an empty room, but like Neighborhood still holds up really well. I was listening to it the other day, and it has some really interesting ideas, and the Dogs Eating Dogs EP is really good.
I woke up with Ghosts on the Dance Floor in my head the other day, and I was like, why? Where did this come from?
Because
I listened to it like 3 times.
Because it's a great song. And so I think I am on record as saying that I think that Blink-182, for many reasons that I understand completely, do not get necessarily the critical praise for that era that they necessarily deserve. But I also think that, to your point about the potential there, I think that they could have been a band that we take extremely seriously in 2020 and could have put out some really interesting stuff. And very much like The Cure, like you said, reinvent themselves constantly. And I mean, like The Cure consciously was like, we're going to blow everything up every album and just reinvent it.
Robert Smith's like, oh no, I'm turning 20. Yeah. Oh no, I'm turning 30. Exactly. Oh no, I'm turning 40.
Exactly. Like he says the band's breaking up before every album comes out, it seems like. So yeah. I feel like the Blink dynamic could have sort of created at least a tension that could create the same ideas. And I think
and the reason it's ironic, because the reason that we picked The Cure is because there are so many obvious influences on Hoppus, Skiba, and DeLonge from The Cure. And that's the one that they just, obviously that's like a far less tangible thing to be influenced by, but like you couldn't have just looked at their path and what happened with them and just be like, hey, maybe if we just, because there's so much influence elsewhere.
It's true. And like Hoppus has been on record as saying that in high school he dressed like Robert Smith and he just wanted to be Robert Smith and be the Cure. And like you can
and Alkaline Trio.
Yeah, I mean,
like Skiba's in Blink now, and Alkaline Trio are just like,
and
what if we made it all more literal and punky?
And I think if you listen to, weirdly enough, California, of all the Blink albums, there's a few songs in there where you're like, oh, you're listening to Cure a lot, Mark.
Yeah.
Like it's just
Mark's got his full Adam Sandler and the Wedding Singer. Sorry, just as a heads up, I was listening to a lot of The Cure at the time. I was very disappointed that you didn't have that queued up anymore on our run sheet.
That's fair. That's fair. That is my bad.
So I watched The Wedding Singer in preparation for this episode. So The Wedding Singer takes place in 1985, so it's pre-Disintegration.
Yes.
Boys Don't Cry is the song that's playing when he's like at his low, but like there are enough nods to The Cure in that movie that I appreciate it so much more now.
It's
like,
been a long time since I've seen that movie. I feel like I should go back to it for exactly that reason.
Yeah, it was.
I always liked it.
I wonder if Adam Sandler, like pre-Uncut Gems, having like 15 years of just like, no disrespect to Lil Wayne's choice to use a click lyric, but I wonder if like 15 years of garbage Adam Sandler movies have obscured the fact that early Adam Sandler movies were like really, really good.
Yeah, like I think The Wedding Singer is one of his best movies.
Yeah, and it's like, it's clever and sweet, and it doesn't rely as much on like Sandler's, there are parts where he screams, but like
his tendencies, yeah.
Yeah, it was sweeter than I remembered. It's just like it's more, if this makes sense, it's as much a Drew Barrymore movie as it is an Adam Sandler movie.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, the Cure stuff is really like his song that he tees up. But I was listening to a lot of Cure at the time. It was all bullshit. It's great. Anyway, not to hijack your entire thing. We're going to talk about The Cure instead of Adam Sandler and Blink-182 after this.
All right, so to talk about Disintegration, we have to talk about The Cure. And as a band that has existed for 44 years, there's a lot to get to. So let's get to it. The Cure were founded in 1973 by school friends Robert Smith, who played piano, Mick Dempsey, who played guitar, Lowell Tolhurst, who played percussion, Mark Sakango. Nope, that's not how you pronounce it.
Can we get a minute for the guy being named Lowell?
Lowell Tolhurst. LOL Tolhurst.
He did it for the lulls.
Mark, I can't pronounce it. Ceccagno on lead guitar and Alan Hill on bass. By 1976, the band had named themselves Malice and consisted of Robert Smith, Lowell Tolhurst, Martin Creasy on vocals, and Pearl Thompson on guitar. By 1977, Creasy had left the band, and the band changed their name to Easy Cure after a song written by Tolhurst. Later in 77, after a talent competition, they signed a recording contract with the German label Areola Hansa. And in 1978, they played a show with a band called Lockjaw, which is only notable because that band featured bassist Simon Gallup, who would become, I think, the longest standing member of The Cure who is not Robert Smith and is still in the band today. Which,
yes. Although he was rotated in and out at one
many
point,
times.
wasn't he?
I think literally every member of The Cure, other than Robert Smith, has been rotated in and out sometimes, and even kind of Robert Smith also.
I got really confused reading the Wikipedia history of like just the band members.
I've said this before that like when I get into a band when I was younger, I would want to know all the information, like who everyone was. The Cure, it's impossible.
And like we'll get into the weirdness of one member in Disintegration being like on Disintegration, but only kind of. It's all very hard to keep up. Look, The Cure, for all intents and purposes, is Robert Smith and 3 of his 8 friends.
Yeah, pretty much. So in 1978, the band was making demos for what would become their first album. The label did not like them. Specifically, the first Cure single, Killing an Arab.
I hear no sound, I'm alive. I'm dead. I'm a stranger to the same. Absolutely nothing. I'm alive. I'm dead. I'm the stranger. Killing an Arab.
That song was created in 1977. The label didn't like it, so they dissolved the band's contract. Around this time, Pearl Thompson was dropped from the band because the guitar playing was not as minimalist as Robert Smith wanted it to be because of his musical tendencies, and the remaining trio became what would be known as the first iteration of The Cure. Killing an Arab was their first single, which was released in 1978. It led to accusations of racism because of the title and the lyrics. However, it has nothing to do with Killing Arabs. It's actually about Albert Camus' The Stranger, which is a very I'm 19 and writing an album song thing to write a song about.
Sure is. Also, I'm 19 and writing a Cure album.
Yeah. Three Imaginary Boys was the band's debut record. It was released in 1979, although in retrospect, the band were unhappy with the album. Robert Smith said, "A lot of it was very superficial. I didn't even like it at the time. There were criticisms made that it was very lightweight, and I thought they were justified. Even when we'd made it, I wanted to do something that I thought had more substance to it." The second single from that album, which sort of, even though it's a great song and a classic song, I think does speak to Smith's feelings of it being lightweight. We all know the song Boys Don't Cry, one of the most famous songs of all time, but it is a very sparse 80s, late 70s sounding song of just like some guitars and drums and bass and simple lyrics. And
at the same time, great song.
A great song, like an all-timer. I've seen them live a couple times, and they usually close the show with it or Killing an Arab. One time I saw them when they were on a curfew because Toronto's stupid, and they played Boys Don't Cry in about 75 seconds, and it was pretty cool. So that second single was released in June, which brought the band a little more notoriety. The Cure then toured with Susie and the Banshees, on which Robert Smith played guitar in the Banshees and did double duty on that tour, playing in both The Cure and the Banshees. This was a huge moment for Robert Smith as it changed his musical perspective and what he wanted to make. He said that on stage the first night with the Banshees, I was blown away by how powerful I felt playing that kind of music. It was so different from what we were doing with The Cure. Before that, I'd wanted us to be like the Buzzcocks or Elvis Costello, the punk Beatles. Being a Banshee really changed my attitude towards what I was doing. So because of this, Smith decides, not for the last time, that he's going to completely change the sound of the band. So in 1979, Dempsey was dropped from the band because he did not like Robert Smith's new musical direction. Simon Gallup, we mentioned before, joined on bass, and Matthew Hartley joined on keys. In 1980, The Cure released 17 Seconds, which I don't know if it's the first quote-unquote goth record, but it's definitely one of the most influential. They started adapting or developing the classic heavy makeup goth look. Regarding goth, Smith told NME, "We had to get away from the anti-image thing, which we didn't even want to create in the first place. It seemed like we were trying to be more obscure. We just didn't like the standard rock thing, and then the whole thing got really out of hand." The Cure's image is Robert Smith in black eyeliner and white face paint and smeared lipstick.
With Edward Scissorhands hair.
So I understand that he has been sort of uncomfortable with the whole goth thing, even though he never stopped doing it and plays it up more now. But
yeah, it's one of those weird things where like he seems to have created it to make a point and then didn't like having made that point and then was just like, well, I don't like it, but here I am and this is what I... But also like if that's how you like to look and not everything has to be like about an image or an anti-image.
Yeah,
like if that's how you look, then just look that way.
And I think we'll see it a lot throughout the story of this band that Robert Smith is clearly extremely uneasy with fame.
Mm-hmm.
And
or at least the specifics of what made him famous.
Yes. And so I think that this was just the start of that. In 1981, the band released Faith, and Smith began to feel that the band was stuck in a, quote, ghoulish rut. So how do you fix a ghoulish rut? You put out one of the most famous goth rock albums of all time in Pornography. Smith told Spin that during the recording of Pornography, he was undergoing a lot of mental stress, but it had nothing to do with the group. It just had to do with what I was like, my age and things. I think I got my worst around Pornography. Looking back and getting on other people's opinions of what went on, I was a pretty monstrous sort of person at the time. And of the band's mindset, Simon Gallup has said, "We sang, it doesn't matter if we all die, and that is exactly what we thought at the time." Despite the fact the Cure had some success before that, Pornography really broke the Cure and sort of made them become the band they are still today.
Fetishizing nihilism worked for them.
Hanging Garden's a great song, though.
Yeah.
The album didn't have a hit because there's not really a single on that record. The Hanging Garden was released as a single, but despite that, the album became the band's first top 10 hit in the UK. And on the Pornography tour, the band adopted their iconic big hair, smeared lipstick look for the first time. Following the tour, Simon Gallup left the band. Apparently, before he left the band, Smith and Gallup hadn't spoken to each other in 18 months, which seems like an awkward way to tour with someone. Smith then rejoined the Banshees after this and fueled rumors, maybe intentionally, that the Cure had broken up, which is not, again, the last time he would do that. In 1982, he told Melody Maker, "Do the Cure really exist anymore? I've been pondering that question myself. It has gotten to a point where I don't fancy working in that format again. Whatever happens, it won't be me, Lawrence, and Simon together anymore. I know that."
Oh, you don't fancy it, do you?
It's not into it.
What if, by the way,
if that was it?
And the Banshees were obviously big and very influential, but what if, had they taken off even more commercially? Does Robert Smith even go back?
It's right. It's true. And maybe the Cure's career ends with Pornography, and then maybe that's held up as this. I mean, it is held up as one of the greatest albums.
We'll debate that a little later. But yeah, there is this interesting what if of the Banshees obviously influenced so many bands and are so important. But if there was just a bit more commercial success and a bit more touring demand, does that scratch the itch for Robert Smith to where he doesn't go back?
I do think he's a guy who does, need a certain amount of control, but
he sure seems
but maybe
like
he also, I feel like there's a bit of an appeal to not having to have that control and just to play guitar in this band.
Or maybe, I don't know, maybe just having it as a break for a year and a half, whatever it ended up being, was just what he needed. So probably helped him improve as a guitarist.
I would imagine
your only job, because I feel like the musicianship improves as you kind of go along through this era of them.
Absolutely. I mean, especially look at the musicianship on Three Imaginary Boys, and they wrote some great punky new wave tunes, but it's very basic.
Yeah, it's post-punk. It's just here are a couple chords and let's go.
Exactly. Chris Perry, who was the band's representative at Polydor Records, convinced the band to completely reinvent their sound instead of breaking up. Perry said that this appealed to Smith because he wanted to destroy the Cure anyway. Lowell Tolhurst moved to keyboards instead of drums, and the band released the single Let's Go to Bed in 1984, which Smith considers to just be a stupid pop song, which it is, but it's a great stupid pop song. In 1984, the band released The Top, which is a psychedelic album because the Cure just in the 80s released a bunch of stuff. On this album, Smith played almost all of the instruments himself, except for drums and saxophone. The album was another top 10 hit in the UK and was the first Cure album to chart on the Billboard 200, peaking at 180.
It's such a weird album for that to be the one that gets them through in the US.
It's true.
It's so odd.
And it doesn't really have a single either. They released the Caterpillar.
And it's not very good.
No, it's not at all. And
it's it's smushed in the middle of all these awesome albums. Yeah, sure, that's the one that'll get you your foot in the door.
And they released the Caterpillar as a single, but it wasn't a huge successful, especially when you think of the success of the Cure in the United States.
Yeah.
But how did that one break them in the States?
I don't know. Music's weird, man.
Yeah, especially 80s music.
Yeah, maybe that one was just it was just so British that the US was oh, look, this is a novelty.
Yeah,
we can
we'll take this actually in. True. Shortly after the album was released, Robert Smith got over himself and convinced Simon Gallup to rejoin the band again. And in 1985, the band released The Head on the Door, one of the greatest Cure albums, as a 5-piece of Smith, Gallup, Tolhurst, Pearl Thompson, and Boris Williams on drums. I think you could probably consider that to be the quote-unquote classic lineup of the Cure, that 5-piece, maybe with Roger O'Donnell later, who we'll get into. That album reached top 75 in the US and had 2 hit singles, In Between Days and Close to Me. When I was a kid, In Between Days was my favorite Cure song. It's not anymore, but I still think it's a great song. 1987 then brought Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, a double album, which is way too long, which reached number 6 in the UK and peaked at 35 in the US. It went platinum thanks to the singles Why Can't I Be You and Just Like Heaven, which you can't get away from in 2020 because that song is fucking everywhere all the time. The band then recruited Roger O'Donnell from the Psychedelic Furs to play keys on the tour for Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, and played as a 6-piece, all the while Lowell Tolhurst's severe alcohol problems were just getting worse and worse. So, after Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, we will take a break. So Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me did what Robert Smith never wanted the band to do, which was become legitimate rock stars. Robert Smith was not comfortable with the fame that album brought him or the band. He moved to Maida Vale in London, and to cope with his severe depression, he began regularly taking LSD, which is not what I did when I was depressed. He was also very, very, very uncomfortable with turning 30 in 1989. Yes, he released all these albums before turning 30, which is insane.
Which is also like, wasn't that like his belief that like all good music came before the artists were 30? So like, it not only was it existential about turning 30 big picture, but also like, yeah, like I'm toast. This is it.
So he moved into this home in Maida Vale with his fiancée Mary Poole and began writing a series of songs by himself. He told The Cure's biography Jeff Apter that he devised this as a contingency plan so he could release a solo album if the band found the new material to be too morose. He said, I would have been quite happy to make these songs on my own. If the group hadn't thought it was right, that would have been fine. However, when he brought these songs to the band,
all 32 of them,
the band loved the direction and loved the songs, and the band began rehearsing for what would be their next record. I
love so much that he came to them with 32 songs and they came up with this rating system to decide.
It's such an interesting way to do it.
It's like a pre-spreadsheet, basically. It's like I read that and I'm like, oh yeah, I definitely would have set up like a Google form for everyone to rate these 32 songs from 1 to 10 and then some composite system for which ones make the album. I love it. Robert Smith didn't realize it at the time. Yeah, that shit would have been conditionally formatted, all in just like black and grayscale, though. Obviously,
not color coded.
Not bright color
for the Cure. Yeah, yes, that's right.
It would have been black to gray to grayish.
So the band took the new material, began rehearsing at Boris Williams' home, and as Blake said, they compared their individual demos that each member had recorded and rated each of them from 1 to 10, which then turned into 32 songs total, which was then cut down to 12 for the album they were making.
Could you imagine had they just like
released all of
like them? Another double album with how large and vast Disintegration feels as is? Like if there was a second album to that?
There's a great compilation that came out, I was in high school still, called Join the Dots, which is basically Cure's B-side, and it's like 6 CDs. Just like so many ideas.
Like 11-minute songs.
Yeah, and like half of them don't work and half of them aren't good at all, but just like they were very clearly at this period. I think one of the CDs is just this period. And it's very clear they're just like throwing shit at the wall and seeing like, But clearly they made the right choices of what to keep.
They sure did.
When the band went to record, Tolhurst's alcoholism reached its boiling point. Smith has insisted now that his attitude towards Tolhurst was actually not because of Tolhurst's alcoholism, but because of a breakdown Smith was having because he was turning 30 and recording the album. Smith said that he decided to enter a, quote, not talking phase. He said that I would be monk-like and not talk to anyone. It was a bit pretentious, really, looking back, but I actually wanted an environment that was slightly unpleasant.
Was it a bit pretentious, do you think?
Yeah, Robert Smith? I don't know. He was very conscious about wanting to abandon the more upbeat mood of the sound of Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, and replace
that notably upbeat Cure album, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me.
He wanted to replace it with the dourness that was present on Pornography. Despite this, and seemingly Robert Smith's best intentions, the band actually had quite a good time recording this album. Roger O'Donnell said in 2009 that, I remember very clearly laughing and joking and fooling around in the control room while Robert was singing Disintegration, and then all of us trying to be serious when he came in to listen back. It was never a serious atmosphere in the studio, and when you think about the album and how dark it is, I'm sure people think that we were sitting around slitting our wrists with candles and chains hanging from the walls. So it sounds like Smith wanted an unpleasant experience, and it sounds like he had an unpleasant experience, but the rest of the band didn't. However, Lowell Tolhurst, despite being a member of The Cure from day one, did not contribute much to this album. He did write the foundation of the song Homesick. because his alcoholism rendered him incapable of recording anything.
Cool.
The other members of the band threatened to quit the band if Tolhurst was not fired before the album was finished, which culminated in a shouting match between the members and Tolhurst, who then stormed out. 3 weeks after that, Smith finally fired him from the band, and Roger O'Donnell was made a full-time member. That's how we get to the recording of Disintegration. Now let's talk about the music of Disintegration.
Yeah, there's half an hour on Robert Smith just going through it as they have success, and oh boy, trying to avoid it, I think, but then being like, you know what, we could redo pornography.
Yeah,
make it better. Make it a little bigger, a little better. This is, and I feel like bigger is the right word for this album, because it's just enormous. Like, there are all these keyboard layers. They're using chimes and glass breaking and like weather sounds.
The beginning of Plainsong, which we heard a little while ago, like that song just sounds massive from the beginning.
Yeah, and some of these longer tracks, they kind of continue to unfold, right? Like, there's this bass guitar interplay. There's all these extra effects. I feel like this is, I don't think it's a hot take, but if people disagree, I'm sorry, but I think this is like Robert Smith as a songwriter and probably as a vocalist too. Yeah. This is just like, so you add all of this.
His range, like his vocal range.
Yeah, you add all of this extra musical complexity, and then Robert Smith has also hit his peak. Yeah. And it's just like, it feels huge. Like, the album feels like kind of an event when you're listening to it. And it's like, I haven't felt that way. I felt like Angel Olsen's All Mirrors felt very much like that. Like, obviously it doesn't sound the same, but it was just like,
feels big.
It's like a world is built around you as you're listening to this album. And it's just like, there's so much to digest that what's going on. And the fact that it's all harmonious is like a really tough balance to strike. And like, you have these melodies that layer over top of this increasingly complex sound. You know, it's a lot of the bands that we've talked about that got really popular are not like super complex musically. Yeah. And I feel like this is one that kind of pushes that
a lot.
I
completely. And I think what's interesting about it too, and when I was listening to it the other day, I think there's a lot of bands, especially like the big famous 80s new wave bands, that they all sound very stuck in the 80s. Like Duran Duran, great songs, but like that came out in the 80s. New Order, same deal. Amazing songs, nothing against the music itself, but it sounds dated. All of the Cure's music, I think you could actually argue that their newer stuff sounds more dated than their older stuff.
But that's because the Cure is now has to try really hard to make Cure albums, right?
But like this album specifically, but also Wish and also some of Pornography doesn't sound like an 80s band to me. It sounds timeless, which I know is a phrase people toss around a lot and is kind of cliche, but I think it's true.
And I think it's important because you can obviously trace the Cure's influence on a ton of bands, and we'll talk about that after. Like, they basically created shoegaze accidentally. Gallup told Yahoo in 2018, at one point we were also the quote godfathers of shoegazing, which was another sort of quick trend that went, and Smith added, like, when that comes back, we'll reclaim our rightful place.
Well, it's here now.
Yeah, it's here. And like, I do feel like The Cure is the rare band that can have multiple waves of influence, because you have this obvious influence on, hey, we're a commercially successful alternative sound. Hey, we have this goth aesthetic. Hey, our songwriting and moodiness is kind of coming at things from not a completely different perspective, but like a different mainstream perspective. Yeah. So you have all of that influence, and then you see the bands and the genres that they influence, but then you get almost this second wave where like, people who like those bands can go back and trace those influences, and it's like, oh, The Cure still holds up and it doesn't sound stuck in the 80s. And now there's this second derivative of influence because people can still go back to it and be influenced by it. Whereas like, I think a lot of bands, like, it's like, okay, you have your influence, and then the bands you influence the next band. Whereas The Cure can kind of keep refeeding that because it's not stuck in the 80s and it sounds bigger than that.
I think part of the reason for that, which is all true, is that not only was it musically interesting and complex and arguably brilliant, it was also insanely commercially successful, which you can see the most of with probably The Cure's most famous song, with Love Song. So Love Song is obviously the biggest hit off this album. Arguably, it's the Cure's biggest hit. I think it's either that or Just Like Heaven, maybe Boys Don't Cry, but probably this one.
Whatever words I say, I will always love you.
It's such a brilliant, simple line, but it's good.
Also so antithetical to everything else Robert Smith wrote in this era.
Yeah, he's actually said before that he said without Love Song, this album would be notably different, which is what he told the biographer Jeff Apter. He said, that one song, I think, makes people think twice. If that song wasn't on the record, it would be very easy to dismiss the album as having a certain mood. But having that one in sort of upsets people a bit because they think that doesn't fit.
Yeah, I think Lullaby goes with it a little bit.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, it does shake that up a little bit. Love Song also has a ton of great covers. Yeah, Adele covered it on 21.
311 has covered it.
One of my favorite ones, because this era of The Cure is like pretty synthy, Death Cab's cover of it just sounds like a Postal Service song.
It's true.
It's like, oh yeah, you could just pluck Ben Gibbard out of there and
there you go.
That's a Postal Service song.
So this song is just a very simple love song Smith wrote for his fiancée, Mary Poole, as I said. I find this album really interesting because I think there's obviously the jokes in music, like the bassist is kind of the forgotten member, but so much of this album is built off of these iconic Simon Gallup bass lines. And this song especially, it was a number 2 charting hit in the US behind Janet Jackson's Miss You Much, and is still to this day the only entry of the band in the top 10 of the Billboard 100. As Blake noted, it's been covered by pretty much everyone. All Music said of the song, the Simon Gallup, Boris Williams rhythm section create a tight, serviceable dance groove, while Smith and Pearl Thompson add further guitar riffs and filigrees as well, adding just enough extra bite to the song. Smith himself delivers the lyrics softly with gentle passion. Smith told Apter that this song was an open show of emotion, and it's taken me 10 years to reach the point where I felt comfortable singing a very straightforward love song. It was the first single off the album. It charted in the top 5 in the UK. The song also won Video of the Year at the 1990 Brit Awards. The band actually wanted to release Lullaby as the first single in the United States, but the label refused.
Yeah, the American label Elektra didn't like this album at first, right?
They felt there wasn't a single, which is odd considering it spawned so many singles.
Yeah.
And that it was too
dour.
How
do you not think there are singles on this?
I know.
It's obviously not an upbeat album, and Love Song doesn't pull it out of that entirely, but it is it's very emotional, and it's very emotional in a moving way. I don't think it's like sorrow more than sadness, but mostly it's just like the intensity of the emotion
and
on
the
it.
mood, and it's like the mood. Even Plain Song, which wasn't a single, it sets the tone of the album immediately, and you know kind of what you're getting, but it sustains itself through these 12 tracks that are all very sprawling, and most of these tracks are 5+ minutes, but they never really feel that long, which I find interesting and is a testament to your point earlier about Robert Smith's level of songwriting and songcraft at this time. The other song that I kind of get the label being I don't know, was what the band wanted to release as their first single in the US, but the label said no, and that's Lullaby.
of the room, and there is nothing I can do. I realize
band's never really said what this song is about, which I find interesting. Tim Pope, who's a longtime collaborator, has speculated it's about Smith's drug use in his past. Smith has just said that the idea came to him after remembering lullabies his father sang to him when he couldn't sleep. He said that my father would always make them up. There was always a horrible ending. They'd be something like, sleep now, pretty baby, or you won't wake up at all.
Wow.
Which, this is how Robert Smith got that way, huh?
I do feel like as maybe less accessible as that song is for those reasons, that song and Close Down are probably the best examples, I think, of like what we were talking about earlier of just like the complexity and the texturing on this album and how Smith's kind of melody works with all of that. I think it's just it's a very, whatever you feel about the song overall, it's a good example of, you know, what makes this album so good and stand up so well.
I think that song and Close Down as well, you're right. I think those hit closest to what Smith originally had in mind for this record, especially looking back to Pornography, which is a very like unsettling and dark record. And I think a lot of these songs, despite them being moody or depressing or dark or whatever you want to call it, for the most part, aren't really that unsettling like some of those older songs are, where like Love Song obviously isn't. Fascination Street's just kind of this big, awesome rock song.
I will say that the like Prayers for Rain, Into the Same Deep Water as You, and then Disintegration is like, that stretch of the album gets you there.
That's also like an unbeatable like stretch of an album.
Oh, yeah. And that's like, we're going to have like, this is Robert Smith singing over a literal rainstorm.
To that point, my favorite song on this album, and what I will stand for as the best Cure song of all time, is the title track of this record.
By bit starts to just let go, like hearts.
Think that Stone Cold Steve Austin chose to have the glass shatter at the beginning of his entrance music because of the little glass break at the beginning of Disintegration?
I like to think so.
Yeah.
I think
Stone Cold Steve Austin, noted
huge Cure fan.
Noted Cure fanatic.
I think that song is such a great encapsulation of the themes, the ideas, where the band was as musicians and songwriters at the time. It's like it just builds and builds and builds that final moment of Robert Smith basically sounding like he's out of breath, screaming how the end always is. It's just like, it's such a great, moody, driving song that I always think is the last song on the album, even though there's two after it, which are good songs also.
Yeah.
But it just feels, I mean, like they close their main sets at concerts now with that song usually. It just feels like the end of the album to me.
I also feel like that 3-song arc that I just mentioned would be a good way to close the album. Like if you could take those two last tracks and move them earlier in the album, and I don't think you would lose much.
I feel like Untitled is kind of I don't want to say it's upbeat, but it feels more like what the Cure would become after this record. And then Homesick is another moody piece, but I think they're good songs, but I just feel like after the almost emotional exhaustion of listening,
it's hard to go on after Disintegration.
Like I don't know where you go after that. All Music said of Disintegration, the song, that it was a standout from the record because of Smith's commanding lead guitar lines that are scaled to epic heights while at the same time being buried in the mix, almost as if they're trying to burst from behind the upfront rhythm section. Roger O'Donnell's keyboards add both extra shade and melody, while Smith's singing is intentionally delivered in a combination of cutting clarity and low resignation, at times further distorted with extreme vocal treatments. And I think that it is a song that sounds like it's fighting with itself, which I think gives it so much power. Like, I remember the first time I heard it being like, this is the most emotional music I've ever heard in my life. I don't know what to do. I also think that song is like, there's like 3 genres fighting each other at once in that song. And I think it's just him laying himself bare and his insecurities on this relationship. And it's really hard to listen to in a way, but also it's such a good song that it's fine. So following the release of Disintegration, Robert Smith said that The Cure had, despite my best efforts, actually become everything I didn't want us to become: a stadium rock band.
Oh no.
Smith said that the album's title was the most appropriate one he could think of because most of the relationship with the band outside of the band fell apart. Calling it Disintegration was kind of tempting fate, and fate retaliated. The family idea of the group really fell apart too after Disintegration. It was the end of a golden period. Again, despite Robert Smith saying it was the end of a golden period, the band embarked on the massively successful Prayer Tour, which you can't do that and not influence every frame of music because everyone knows the fucking song. 50,000 people and grossed $1.5 million from one show. The band's overwhelming popularity in the United States caused Smith to have a breakdown and said the band had reached a stage that he couldn't cope with. The band was also fighting for most of the tour, and Smith became a heavy, heavy cocaine user. So, happy things. The album, however, peaked at number 3 on the UK albums chart, which was the highest position the band had reached at that point. Got 3.5 stars from Rolling Stone. Melody Maker felt, ironically, that the album lacked melody and said, "You'll be lucky to find a tune here, or at least a gag." Robert Christgau gave the album a C+ and said that Smith was trying to reach a larger audience with goth cliches and pumping his bad faith and bad relationships into depressing moderato play-loud key anthems that are far more tedious than his endless vamps. However, retrospectively, the album is now looked at as one of the greatest albums of all time.
The influence from this album is just, I mean, it's hard to
so
separate one album from all of The
Yeah.
Cure, but like, you don't get AFI or Tiger's Jaw or like My Bloody Valentine or brand new, even like the newer stuff, like you don't get Turnover.
Yeah.
Probably like the joke about them being the godfathers of shoegazing is like really accurate. And there's even some like, you can see some influence on like the dream pop genre
Yeah.
of just like,
Totally.
okay, you can be a little sparkly. And
Again, I keep going back to Plainsong, but I do think that is just a dream pop tune.
yeah. Smith has what I think is a great perspective on this. He says, Cure fans do like a lot of different styles of music. We would have never been as successful as we've been if we stuck to this narrow idea of what we should be doing, which is an interesting quote in retrospect because he was so obsessed with what they were doing at the time. But also, I wonder if as much as their style influencing bands that kind of took from that style had an influence, I wonder how much that just their openness to changing their sound and like being genre fluid
Yeah.
kind of has an influence as well of just like, whoa, well, they tried all this different stuff and like didn't stick to one lane. So like, why do we have to? And obviously there are some bands who are like, no, we're this and this is what we're going to stick to. But I think, they were like, hey, we're immensely successful doing kind of what we feel like and pushing boundaries and trying new stuff. And
Yeah. And like, it's clearly like historically and critically looked back as a success.
I think my favorite quote about it comes from Stephen Hayden, who in 2019 was writing about their Hall of Fame induction for Uprocks. He said, "The Cure is a sleeper cell lurking in the architecture of modern pop, influencing new generations of ponderous, gorgeous songs designed to guide teens through their most epic wallows. Indie, emo, SoundCloud rap, even mainstream pop, all of it has been touched in some way by the influence of The Cure." And yes, I'm going to continue my streak of referencing Lil Peep on this podcast because he even sampled The Drowning Man on his song Flannel. The Cure has this wide range of influence.
Well, I think not only I think Hayden's point's really interesting, especially as it relates to pop and mainstream music, because while yes, they were extremely influential and had all these different sounds, they were also extremely successful. Like you can look at Pixies, who are successful now, but were not commercially successful at their time. And it's like, yes, they influenced all these bands that became more commercially successful and they influenced fucking everybody. But The Cure did that while also being one of the biggest bands in the world.
Right, which opened up the alternative rock genre, really.
Yeah.
Like Nirvana definitely borrows more from Pixies than from
Yes.
The Cure, but the success of The Cure probably opens that door in a more meaningful way. And then later, you know, does a band like Smashing Pumpkins, like
Totally.
with their sound and their aesthetic, and then further down the line, like does a band that looks like and sounds like My Chemical Romance get a shake if The Cure hasn't come along before? And obviously we've talked about multiple different bands that influence it, so all of this stuff goes together. But yeah,
It's not one path.
The Cure
but-
was like the biggest band in the world for a minute there.
Yeah, like everybody knows Love Song or Just Like Heaven.
So Jake, we agreed very quickly that Disintegration was the Cure album that we were going to do.
Yes.
Sometimes we have some debate on those about, you know, which one is our favorite or which one we have the most interesting takes on or which one people like the most. This one was pretty straightforward. To me, that was because it's one of my favorite albums ever, and it's my favorite Cure album. Is it your number one?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think they have 7 albums that I would say I like really like.
Yeah, I think that seems right. I'm going to do a quick count now, but I think I agree with you. I also think that they, like, Disintegration is, what's odd about it is that it is, I think, their best album, but then I think you could rank after Disintegration, any ranking I actually think is probably a correct and appropriate ranking.
Yeah, as I do with these things, after I do my own rankings, I like to look at what outlets have ranked or the artists themselves or Reddit and things like that. They're all over the place. Even number one is like a lot of people have Pornography at number one. Head on the Wall.
Head on the Door is always
Head on
up
the
there.
Door, sorry. I have Disintegration 1. I have Pornography 2. I like the darkness of it and them like teetering on the edge of breaking up and being like completely exacerbated with all of it. It's also a fun one to go back to because it's like the peak of the goth side of The Cure. And to Robert Smith's points about them being a trilogy, I do feel Pornography and Disintegration pair really well together.
I agree, yeah.
It's like, hey, we made this great album. We experimented a little bit and moved around. We got back to this and we made it even better. So that's my second favorite one.
Yeah, I also have Pornography number 2.
Okay.
I think that it's, to everything you just said, I think it's also one of their more interesting records, especially because it was so successful without really having a hit. It's such an interestingly constructed record to me of just being like, hey, we're really sad. Here's a bunch of songs about it. Also, we're not going to put them on the radio.
Yeah.
And 100 Years is one of the best openers of any album.
What do you have 3?
I don't know. I like genuinely, like, I'm looking at the
good prep for the segment, bud.
No, I mean, like, I don't mean that I don't know in terms of like I haven't thought about it. I mean, I don't know because there's 4 options.
Yeah.
And they're all kind of different. Like Head on the Door was a big album for me when I was younger.
See, I have Head on the Door lower than I think most people.
I do now.
Okay.
Like, I feel like it's,
I actually like Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me better.
I kind of do too.
Yeah, I have Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me number 3, which
Really?
I realize is pretty high. Yeah.
I feel like Head on the Door I really like. I think that it doesn't hold the weight of the others as the whole. Like 6 Different Ways is a great song, but it's just kind of like, it's fun pop.
Yeah.
But
And it's like, it's a little more polished in a way you don't necessarily want a Cure album to be
Yeah, I
polished.
agree.
But I do think like some of the stuff they try on that album in retrospect, like shows you what's coming.
Yes,
and it's like,
I
okay.
agree.
So like now it's like, it's a pretty natural progression. It feels like now, even if it didn't at the time. And
yeah, I also think that to what I was kind of saying earlier about them not feeling 80s, I feel like that's their most 80s feeling
that's
record.
fair. That's fair for sure.
I think I would put Wish at number 3.
Okay.
I like that they kind of put out just like a rock record after Disintegration. Like I think Open's one of my favorite Cure songs.
Okay.
Was it From the Edge of the Deep Green Sea is a really good song. I just think it's, I mean, I know it has Friday I'm in Love, which is,
It's fine.
it is what it is.
Yeah.
But I think I kind of
Now
like,
that's an 80s song,
Yes.
even if it
Oh
came
my
out in the
God,
early
yeah.
90s.
yeah, absolutely it is. But I think I like that they had the success of Disintegration and Smith was like, I don't want to be a stadium rock band. And then he made a stadium rock record.
There's so much of that in the Cure's history of Robert Smith just being like, no, I'm not that.
Yeah, but
Here I
then here
am
it
being
is.
that. Yeah. The other one that I really like, and this is like the Cure purists will not like this, but like Three Imaginary Boys or Boys Don't Cry as it was later. I think because it sounds so different and it's like a little more fun and post-punky. I don't know. I like going back to that one. I like that album.
I like that album too, but I can't take it seriously because it sounds so much of that post-punk time. And it's just like, it's
fine.
like half of it, like Plastic Passion is a good song, but it sounds like an SNL sketch about that
Cure.
era of music.
Yeah, it sounds like, to take it back to The Wedding Singer, it sounds like Adam Sandler doing a Cure song.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like it though.
I like
fun.
it too.
It's like and obviously it's like lighter than this other stuff.
It also, I think that album does hint at some of their later brilliance. Like 10:15 on a Saturday Night is a great tune. Caroline Arab's a great tune. Boys Don't Cry obviously has stood the test of time forever.
Yeah, I think I know the reason you like Blood Flowers. Like I know why I like Blood Flowers, but there are just like so many like 10-minute songs.
Yeah,
on that.
just droning
like,
10-minute songs.
There's some Jake tracks on there. All right, that leads us to we got to pick a song from Disintegration for the mixtape.
So I think there's two ways we can do this one. As I said, the title track is my favorite track on the record, but Disintegration is such a massive album that it might be more appropriate to pick a song that is like from the album that meets the stature of the success of the album. What do you think?
So in that case, it would be Love Song?
Love Song or Fascination Street, probably.
I think I lean toward the self-title or the title track. Not only do I think it's a better snapshot of the album musically, I think the fact that obviously Love Song was the biggest single, but Disintegration is the song that's maybe stood the test the longest, and to your point earlier is what they close with now. I'm fine with that one.
Yeah.
If it's your favorite on the,
it is. It's one of my favorite songs of all time. So
yeah,
I
think we can go that way.
Enjoy an 8-minute dirge in the middle of the mixtape, folks.
We have a couple of those already though.
That's true.
We did a fucking Decemberist episode. There's like a 14-minute sub mixtape on the mixtape. It's fine. There's no avoiding it. And at least we didn't pick one of the long Jimmy Eat World ones.
Yes, that's true.
Please try the fish. No!